Now let's talk about earthquakes. Earthquake is another such natural calamity that takes place because of the tectonic plate movement. So, when the lithospheric plates they move, the surface of the earth vibrates. These vibrations can travel all around the earth and these vibrations are called as earthquakes. I'll give you one example to make you understand this better. For example, when you're walking on the land, when you're walking on the floor and you put your feet very heavily, you can observe the vibrations or the waves of the floor moving, isn't it? Similarly, when the tectonic movement of plates takes place under the surface of the earth, the vibrations or those movements, they cause sudden vibrations of the land around the movement of the plates. So, this results in earthquake. As you see here, we have the plates and they move in different kind of ways. First is divergent when they move in opposite directions. Then we have convergent when one plate goes under another plate. And then we have transform plate boundary when the plates they move in opposite directions vertically. These all kinds of movements may result in earthquakes. Here is a diagram that shows us how actually an earthquake takes place under the surface of the earth. So, the place in the crust where the movement starts is called the focus. As you see here, this point is known as the focus because this is where the plates have started to move and this has resulted in the movement of the area around the plates. The place on the surface above the focus is called an epicenter here. So, just above the focus is inside the crust of the earth and the epicenter is on the surface of the earth. Just above the focus, it is called the epicenter or the place where the earthquake originates. Now, further, the vibrations that travel outward from the epicenter as waves. Greatest damage is usually closest to the epicenter. For example, if there is the epicenter, the greatest damage due to an earthquake would be to the nearby areas of the epicenter. So, as these vibrations move towards the other surface areas, the damage decreases. So, now what are the different types of earthquake? Earthquake is also of 3 different types. Now, the 3 different types of earthquakes are P waves or longitudinal waves, S waves or transverse waves, L waves or surface waves. So, as you see in the image that the P waves, they form a P-like structure and these waves, the longitudinal waves, they move in lines from one another. That is why they are known as longitudinal waves. However, the S waves or the transverse waves, they move in a shape of a actual wave. The plates, they start to move in a wave form. That is why they are known as transverse waves. Whereas the L waves or the surface waves, this happens when the surface of the earth, not the exact crust of the earth, but rather the lithospheric surface of the earth moves in wavy format. So, this is not an earthquake which resides very deep in the crust of the earth. It is on the surface of the earth. Now, these earthquakes, they cannot be predicted that what impact would be there. However, the negative effects of earthquakes can be minimized as we can prepare and we can always be prepared for them beforehand. Some common earthquake can be predicted using various methods and these methods are locally adopted by people and this includes the animal study behavior. It is known that animals can actually understand or predict or forecast the natural calamities if there is going to be. So, the local people, they observe the behavior of animals from time to time in order to predict these kind of calamities. For example, the fish in the ponds, they get agitated or restless. Sometimes the snakes, they come on the surface of the earth. Of course, if the plates are moving, the crust of the earth is also moving. So the snakes and the animals which reside inside the surface of the earth, they come upwards. So this is how the people predict it. But this is not a hard and fast accepted rule or method of prediction of earthquakes. Now, how is an earthquake measured? I am sure whenever you see a news about an earthquake, you always ask that what was the measurement or what was the epicenter of this earthquake. So, an earthquake is measured with a machine which is known as seismograph. The impact of an earthquake or how strong or feeble the earthquake was, it is measured through a seismograph. Now, the seismograph, it has a Richter scale. The Richter scale is a mathematical formula which determines the strength of the waves or strength of the movement of the platonic waves of the earth, and this is recorded on the seismographs. So, the resulting measurement, it defines the exact size of the quake or how strong it was. The magnitude of earthquake is measured on a Richter scale, which is a scale, which is a way of formula of measuring the strength of earthquake. For example, an earthquake, if it is of 2.0 or less, can be felt only a little and only around the epicenter. However, an earthquake over 5.0 can cause damage from things falling, buildings cracking, etc. And an earthquake of 6.0 decibels or higher magnitude is considered very strong, and 7.0 is classified as a major earthquake, and it can result in loss of infrastructure, loss of life, etc. So, now here is a case study of an earthquake that took place in India in the year 2001. So, earthquake, a very major earthquake hit Bhuj. Bhuj is located in Gujarat. So, there was a massive earthquake which measured 6.9 decibels on the Richter scale. It hit the town of Bhuj on 26th of January 2001. By observing this newspaper clipping, can you understand that what are the areas or how are the people affected by major earthquakes? Now, as you observe here, what are the headlines that you read? We read that earthquake hits Bhuj. Then, schools worst affected. Now, this newspaper clipping is telling us what were the aftermath, what were the effects of this earthquake. So, the schools, they were affected majorly because a lot of students, teachers, professors, they lost their lives. However, also Bhuj relief effort blighted. The people living in the state of Gujarat, they feared that food items, sanitation items, blankets, medical supplies were not able to reach them because the roads, the routes, they were blocked or cracked because of the massive earthquake. However, destruction of Bhuj also took place. Phone lines, water pipelines, power plants, power stations, transmission lines, they were all knocked out, they were all destroyed in that earthquake. And gradually, a state of emergency was declared. The president, he declared a state of emergency to cope up with the aftermath of this earthquake. There were also fire in the cities because a lot of charcoal power plants and cookers which produce mass scale energy, they were overturned. So, due to the friction of this highly combustible substances, a fire broke. So, later on, since it was totally ineffective to cope up with the aftermath of this earthquake, the CM appealed everyone to help and contribute to save the state of Gujarat and the people who were injured. Now, the question is that since we cannot actually predict these earthquakes, how can we save ourselves from them? So, we can always prepare well in advance for the earthquakes. So, here are some measures that how can we prepare ourselves for the earthquakes. You see all these symbols, they tell us that what not to do and what to do during an earthquake. For example, you should not go out. You should stay away from big buildings or whatever destruction is being caused. You should take shelter under hard surfaces such as hard tables, kitchen counters, etc. You should not drive. You should not let the animals inside the house. And you should not use combustible or inflammatory items. So, you need to find a safe spot to protect yourself from whatever destruction is being carried out around you. This safe spot may include a table or a desk, against the inside corner of a wall, under a kitchen counter, etc. Now, you should stay away from places such as fireplaces, areas around chimneys, windows that shatter which are made of glass, mirrors, picture frames, etc. Then, you should be prepared. You should spread awareness among your friends, family members to face any kind of disaster or natural calamity. Now let's talk about landslides. This is another kind of movement of the earth or natural disaster which occurs due to the platonic movement of the plates. So, I am sure you must have seen in the news that there is a landslide in Uttarakhand, in Himachal Pradesh. Now, what is a landslide? We will study further. So, what are the causes of landslides? There are three major causes of landslides. Before that, we need to understand what is a landslide. When, due to the reasons of the movement of the ground or the plates in the earth, or due to exogenic forces, external factors surrounding the surface of the earth, the land mass, a huge mass of land, it falls or it gets separated from the land mass. This is known as a landslide. So, the three major causes of landslides are ground causes which occur on the ground level, the morphological causes and the physical causes. Now, what are the ground causes of landslides? Now, when the weak, sensitive or the weathered material such as rocks, sand, plants, huge stones, they move or they result in a landslide. This is known as a ground cause of landslide. These adverse ground structures such as joints, fissures, etc., when they result in occurrence of landslide, this is known as ground causes. Now, the other kind is morphological causes. When the ground uplifts, for example, if you see here, due to volcanic activities or due to any kind of other factors such as wind, water or erosion of soil, the ground level, it erupts, it lifts up, it uplifts. This is known as morphological causes. Then there are physical causes. When the prolonged precipitation, an earthquake, volcanic eruption or thawing, they cause a landslide, they are known as physical causes. They affect or they result in a landslide physically. For example, a lot of rain. I am sure that you must have heard that you should not visit mountain ranges or the hill stations during winter season. Why? Because due to a prolonged precipitation, rainfall, heavy rainfall, the land, it gets eroded, the soil gets eroded and then the roots or the piece of land, the chunk of land, it slides down or it results in landslides. For example, earthquakes. As you see here in this image, an earthquake has totally destroyed a settlement in the hilly areas as it resulted in a landslide. Now, we have already studied about endogenic forces. Now, what are exogenic forces? Let's have a look. We studied that exogenic forces are the forces that work on the surface of the earth and it results in transformation of the landforms or the surface of the earth. The exogenic forces, they consist of movement of rivers, winds. They work on the surface of the earth. Now, what are exogenic processes? Exogenic processes, they include geological phenomena, geological elements and processes that originate externally outside the surface of the earth. Apart from that, they are genetically related to the atmosphere, hydrosphere and biosphere. For example, wind or water, ice, glaciers, etc. Therefore, the process of weathering, erosion, transportation, sedimentation, deposition, denudation, these are all the factors that change the surface of the earth from time to time, but they happen on the surface of the earth. Now, what are the major landforms that are continuously made or destroyed by the process of exogenic forces? These processes are weathering and erosion. What are the major landforms that are formed due to exogenic forces? The landscape is continuously worn away by two processes. One is weathering and the other one is erosion. We will study about these processes in detail. As you see, on the surface of the earth, there are different types of landforms. There is a volcano, plain, mountains, glaciers, lake, etc. How does these landscapes continuously change? So, the first process is known as weathering. Weathering is a process of making up or formation of rocks on the surface of the earth. How does weathering happen? So, there are various factors which result in the process of weathering, such as climatic changes, chemical actions, changes in vegetation and some other reasons. Weathering is when the huge mountains or land masses, they break and form rocks on the surface of the earth. You observe here that this is a mountain, and due to some of the other climatic or natural vegetation factors, this has resulted in formation of such large stones or rocks. Now, another process is the process of erosion. So, erosion is wearing away of the topmost layer of soil which is present on the lithosphere. This is the wearing away of landscape by different agents such as water, wind and ice. The eroded material is then carried away and transported by these factors such as wind, water and ice, and they eventually get deposited at one place. This process is known as erosion. The carrying away of the topmost layer of the earth is known as erosion, and once it starts to get settled or get deposited, this is known as deposition. And the process of deposition, it creates different landforms on the surface of the earth. We have four factors which result in the process of erosion and deposition. These factors are work of rivers, work of sea waves, work of glaciers and work of wind. These factors result in erosion of the surface of the land and the deposition of it, which results in further formation of major landforms on the surface of the earth. Now let's study in detail what does work of river means. How does river affects the process of erosion and deposition. So, what happens when you see a river? What do you observe? A river is always flowing, the water is moving. This running water in the river, it erodes the landscape. For example, if you see a river which is going or flowing through a city, do you observe that beside the river bed, it is always wet, and the soil along with the river bed, it is also flowing with the running water. This is the process of erosion, and this is how erosion is caused by the work of river. Then we have waterfalls. Waterfalls, when the river tumbles at a steep angle over a very hard surface of rock, it breaks down the rocks beneath it, and this causes or this forms the valley, and these are the waterfalls. For example, if a river is flowing and the river comes or reaches a point where there is no land further, and then it goes down, the running water, it goes down and falls on the bed of rocks which is further below. This is known as a waterfall. This also results in formation of small stones and soil, because whenever the force of this rainfall, it touches the ground it becomes more and more feeble, and this landform is broken further into rocks. Now, there are thousands of small waterfalls around the world. Can you name or list down few waterfalls which are located in India? Now, one such waterfall which is located around the world in Canada and USA is known as the Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls are one of the biggest, huge waterfalls of the earth, and they are located on the border between Canada and USA in North America. Now, another example of waterfalls is the Angel Falls. This is located in Venezuela in South America. Do you observe that how the water is coming down and how a rainbow is formed due to the reflection of sun rays on the water crystals? Victoria Falls is another example of waterfalls which is located in Zambia, in Zimbabwe, in Africa. Work of river. As a river flows, we have studied that it creates erosion and deposition of soil, but it also forms an oxbow. Now we will study what is an oxbow. So as a river enters a plain, it twists and turns. The river, it never flows in a straight way. There are turns and twists. These bends are known as meanders. Due to continuous erosion and deposition of soil along the sides of a meander. So, for example, if a river is flowing from these mountains and it is flowing, so it is never in a straight form. It is in a form of a twist and turns. These twists and turns are known as meanders. The forming of large bends are known as meanders. So, this bend is known as a meander. Now, due to continuous erosion of soil and deposition at the sides of a meander, for example, the material of or the eroded soil also settles here in the sides of meanders. So, these end, they form meander loops and they come closer and closer. So, once a large meander may become a closed meander. It is due to course of time and the meander loop. It cuts off and the river forms a cut-off lake. This lake is known as an oxbow lake. For example, if a lot of sediments are being formed or being deposited here, soon this part of river will get detached from the lake, from the river, and it will form a lake itself. Now, here is an example of an oxbow lake. Do you see that a lot of twists and turns are there, and soon, for example, if this part of the river, it cuts itself from the river due to the process of sedimentation and due to the process of deposition. This is known as an oxbow lake. Now let's talk about a formation of a flood plain. How are flood plains formed? So, the deposition on the landforms are known as flood plains. So, at times a river, when it overflows a banks, overflows the side of the rivers, it leads to flooding of that particular area. As it floods, there are deposits or layers of soil and other materials such as stones, gravel, which are left on the banks of the river. So, as you see here, the level of water rises and all this material such as gravel, stone, soil, this gets deposited here on the land. And as soon as the flooding ends, the material still rests on the surface of the land. This results in formation of flood plains. A new layer on top of this, a flood plain, a plain layer is formed. This is a flood plain. As we talked about an oxbow lake and flood plains, as you see that these are the small gravel, small piece of sediments which are left by the river which is flowing through, and a lake is formed which is separated from the river. This form of lake is known as an oxbow lake. And the plains which are further formed due to a flooding river are known as flood plains. Do you know some example of flood plains which lie in India? The plains along the Ganga river and the Yamuna river are known as flood plains because they were formed due to the long process of flooding in these rivers. Now, let's talk about formation of a delta. So, what is a delta? As the river approaches the sea, the river it starts from a glacier in the mountains and it flows throughout plains, plateaus, and finally it mixes with the sea. The speed of the flowing water, it decreases gradually. The river, it starts to break up into number of streams, and these streams are called as distributaries. So small number of streams which are formed when a river is mixing up or is approaching the sea, they are known as distributaries. The river, the speed of the river or the flowing water, it becomes slower and slower, and it carries a lot of deposits with it. Why does the speed become slow? Because there are a number of materials apart from flowing water known as deposits in it. Each distributary forms its own mouth. Each distributary forms its own mouth where it is meeting with the sea. The collection of sediments from all the mouths form a delta. So, when all the material and the sediments which are flowing in these distributaries, they became settlements or they get deposit in a place, this place is known as a delta. Here is an image of showing that how different distributaries are formed. There is a main river which is coming from the mainland, as you see here, and then there are small channels of this river. These are known as distributaries, and each distributary has its mouth. So this place from where these channels gets separated, these are known as mouths of distributary. This is formed because of the formation, because of the deposition of the sediments that the river was carrying. And this area which is formed between two distributaries is known as a delta. Now let's talk about work of sea waves. The erosion and deposition of the sea waves gives rise to coastal landforms. Have you observed Western Ghats and the western coast as well as the Eastern Ghats? How are they formed? There is no river so that the settlements would be formed. They were formed because of the erosion that was caused by sea waves. Sea waves, they continuously approach and strike the rocks of the land around the sea. These rocks, they further gets distributed or broken down and they form plain layers or rough surfaces, and they start to settle down, get deposited. Over a time, they become longer and larger in size. Thus, a hollow cave-like structure is sometimes formed on rocks, and they are called as sea caves. So, as you observe here, there is a sea and there are large rocks. As the sea waves, they touch these rocks, over a period of time, these rocks are cut at some places where the waves approach mostly with a lot of force. They are known as sea arcs, and sometimes even a cave is formed. This is known as a sea cave. Now, as these cavities, they become bigger and bigger, only the roof of the cave remains, thus forming sea arch. Erosions, they break the roof and only walls are left. So, there may be times that the whole rock is separated from the cave and only a wall is left. These they-like features are called stacks. The steep rocky coast rising almost vertically above sea water is called a sea cliff. So, as you observe that there is an arc which is formed by the sea wave and the erosion caused by them, the surface or the landmass above it is known as a sea cliff. The sea waves, they deposit the sediments along the shores forming beaches. Now, here are some examples of sea caves. So, these are formed, as you observe, due to the erosion which was caused by sea water and waves. Now let's talk about work of ice. So, ice on the planet Earth is mostly in the form of glaciers, and glaciers, they are nothing but frozen rivers. They also erode a huge amount of landscape by bulldozing soil and stones, and they expose these when the solid rock is below. Glaciers, when they move, they carve deep hollows. As the ice melts, they get filled up with water and they become beautiful lakes in the mountains. They are also known as lagoons. So the materials which is carried by the glaciers, such as big and small rocks, sand, silts, it gets deposited at one place along the shore of the river. These deposits, they form glacial moraines. In their way, glaciers, they carry materials such as rocks, stones, silt, sand, soil, and it deposits them. It deposits these places. It results in formation of glacier moraines. Now let's talk about work of wind. Wind is one of the major factors for erosion and deposition of soil, as well as formation of major landforms. It is an active agent for erosion and deposition, mainly in desert regions, because in desert region the soil, the sand is very dry and it is very light, so it can be carried easily away by the wind. Sometimes in deserts you see rocks such as this, which are in the shape of a mushroom. Don't you think this rock is in a shape of mushroom? The top is bigger and the bottom is very steep. These are known as mushroom rocks, and they are formed because of the work of the wind. The wind erodes the lower section because it is where the wind hits the rock hardest, whereas the upper section is more wider in nature. Therefore, such rocks have a narrow bottom, a narrow base and a wider top. When the wind blows, it lifts and transports sand from one place to another, and this gives rise to sand dunes. As you see, we always talk about that sand dunes, they shift from one place to another. But why does it happen? Why do sand dunes shift from one place to another? Because of the movement of wind. When a very strong wind blows in a desert area, it takes away, it erodes with itself the tiny sand granules. So this happens in very large quantity, and then they shift to one place. When it stops blowing, the sand falls and gets deposited in a low hill like structures. These structures are therefore called as sand dunes. The grains of sand are very light and fine in nature, and the wind can carry them for very long time. When such sand is deposited in large areas, it is called as loess. Large deposits of loess in sand dunes are found in China. Now, what have we learnt in this chapter so far? We began with learning about volcanoes. How are volcanoes formed? We learnt about the plate tectonics, the lithospheric plates that may result in formation of new landforms such as mountains, volcanoes. These are also the reasons for earthquake and landslides. We also learnt in this chapter about different kind of landforms and how are they formed with the movement of river, sea waves, wind and glaciers. So I hope you understood everything in this chapter. Thank you.